Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about grief and loss. That is what my lesson plan is on. And I chose grief and loss because unfortunately I've had a lot of experience with grief and loss. So today I want to go through and teach you some mapping skills, the definitions of grief, loss, mourning, bereavement, and then work our way to a case study that we can then apply these mapping skills to and give you a tool to use going forward with your students. So let's start out first with our definitions of grief and loss. So, grief is a reaction to any form of loss that encompasses a range of feelings from deep sadness to anger, and the process of adapting a significant loss can vary dramatically from one person to another, depending on his or her background, their beliefs, their relationship to what they lost, and other factors. Here is our agenda for the day. We're going to start out with our intro about grief and loss, then go to sharing stories about grief and loss and how we experienced it and expressed it in a healthy or an unhealthy way. Then we will talk about mapping skills, how to apply those mapping skills to a case study, and then wrap up. So let's get started with our introduction and our learning outcome. So our learning outcome is to identify and describe the grief process, including defining loss, mourning, grief and bereavement, a case study, and applying the mapping skills obtained to that case study. And I also put a quote on here from C.S. Lewis because he's got some amazing books on loss and grief. He wrote many books after his wife had passed away, and he dealt with such intense grief. And his quote from his book, The Grief Observer, is, "Nobody ever told me that grief felt so much like fear." And that is an absolute true statement. If you are a person like myself who has experienced great loss. 5 years ago, I lost my mom. My mom passed away because she failed to thrive. She stopped eating, she stopped drinking, and within a couple of months, she passed away because she chose to pass away. But my mom was an extremely depressed woman her whole life, to the point that when we actually did her funeral service and we looked for pictures for her to do on a board, every picture we found of my mom was laying down. She was never in the upright position. She was always laying in bed. She was always sick. She was always depressed. She was always feeling sorry for herself. She could never get out of her cycle or her own way. Fast forward to a year ago, my brother passed away in May and my sister passed away in August. Both of cancer. My brother had pancreatic cancer. My sister had uterine serous sarcoma cancer, which is a very rare form and actually only affects less than 1% of the population. My brother's death was a different journey than my sister's. So with my brother, he was so angry the whole time he was sick that he never got closure. I never got closure because I never got to have conversations with him and see what he was thinking or feeling, or where he felt like he could change things or get a more positive attitude, or how to address some of his issues so that he didn't go out in an angry way. But he did go out in an angry way. And even his death was a struggle. He just couldn't get out of his own way to peacefully pass on. And I always felt it was just a surreal experience to watch someone get so caught up in anger to not be able to move past that anger. It was a very unhealthy way. We all felt stuck. We all felt like we never had the time because all our time was consumed with his anger. He also was somebody different to the outside world than he was to his family. So at his funeral, because he was a Boy Scout leader, A lot of Boy Scouts came forward and spoke about him because they've worked with him for the last 20 years. And as they told stories of him, I thought, who is this person? I never knew this person they were speaking of. And I left the funeral extremely saddened that here I grew up with him, and yet I never really knew this good side of him. I've only seen the angry side of him. And it was very hard to get closure with his death. We also, because he chose to be cremated, there was no mass because he wasn't a believer, and he was never able to give his life over to Christ before he passed, which was another very big concerning thing for me and worried me. But we never had closure. So a few months later, 3 months later, actually, my sister passes of cancer. But my sister had a different journey. She, for the year and a half that she was diagnosed, had a bucket list, went through her bucket list, was determined to live her life to the fullest, even if the next day was her last day. She wanted to know when she went, she had done everything she wanted to do. So it was a very different journey with her. I was her caretaker. I was able to not only have deep conversations with her, it was easy to have closure with her. So when she passed, she had a smile on her face. She had a glow. She had flawless skin. It just was so much more peaceful than when my brother passed away. And we were able to do the funeral she wanted and gather all her friends and celebrate her life. And then also, release butterflies. She loved butterflies. And so it was a very different process. And I felt with her, it was a natural grief, and it was processed, and it went emotionally the way it should have gone. Where with my brother, I had a lot of unresolved grief. So I had, fortunate when you're in the hospice program, you get grief counseling, not only during the diagnosis, but after. So for a year, I got grief counseling individually and in a group for a year after via hospice. And that was a great experience because I learned very many tools to put in my toolbox for grief and loss, as well as it helped me resolve my issues with my brother passing and my mom, because I never really got the closure with either one of them because I didn't know either one of them. And that is how I learned the mapping skills that we are going to apply in a little bit. And unfortunately, about 2 weeks ago yesterday, my dad passed away. So that was a very, it's been a hard loss, but not one I've totally processed, because a few days after that, 2 teenagers at my high school, seniors, they committed suicide in a suicide pact. So I'm grieving these 2 girls, I'm grieving my dad, and I'm helping 500 students and my faculty and staff mourn the loss of these 2 girls. Our community has been impacted, our whole school, and it has been a very heavy weight that has kind of dragged me down a little bit, because I miss not having my dad to be able to talk to every day and visit on the weekends and have that time with him. But my dad, I can rationalize. He was 88. He had a good life. He was never sick. So to go this quick would have been his wish. But these 2 girls were just beginning life. And here they took their life. They would have went to college next year. They were on the journey of a lifetime. And they gave that up for we don't even know what reason as of yet. So we are still working with the police, trying to figure out if there's a diary or anything or clues that would give us. None of their friends knew of any clues. It has just been a life-altering, shocking loss. And I can't even imagine as a parent that kind of loss, because that to me would have just ripped me apart. I don't know if I would have ever been able to go on without my son, and I'm very grateful that I have my son and that I get to spend all the time I get to spend with him. So I think think you can see there are healthy ways and very unhealthy ways to grieve. Because grief is a normal reaction to a loss. There's no two ways about it. It is a function. It allows us to feel sorrow and acknowledge and identify and feel and integrate what we lost without that person, and now how our life is going to go on and how we love without that person. An unhealthy grief is a prolonged suffering. It disrupts your normal activities. It prevents life from being lived to the fullest. We never get to experience life when we are stuck in a holding pattern of grief. So, I have some of the terms that I defined to help us understand the grieving process and how it goes. So, loss is a real or perceived deprivation of something deemed meaningful, both death related and undeath related. So, the loss of a job, a divorce, a health crisis, an abortion, those are all real losses. Mourning is an outward expression of our grief and can apply to both a death-related person or a non-death-related circumstance. Grief now is an emotion that is experienced by the loss and is characterized by sorrow, distress, and the personal and interpersonal experience of the loss. And then bereavement is a period of time where we feel sorrow following the death of a significant other, like I feel the sorrow of the loss of my father. And because I guess mostly I'm an orphan now, and that is definitely not something I thought was coming on the horizon. Healthy grief, a normal reaction to a healthy grief is to withdraw, to struggle thinking clearly, to not eat, have sleep disturbances, to be angry and irritable and lonely, and kind of isolate. It changes your interest in joy because of the loss. But it's a period of time as you go through the loss that you then come to find your joy again. And it's not like it happens overnight. It takes time. It's definitely a process. And you feel like you've lost a limb, but eventually the sun does shine again, and God comes through and He does heal our hearts. And for all three of my losses, and now my students, I pray very hard, and I keep my constant contact with the Lord, because that is what's going to heal my heart fully. It's a process that you need to emotionally figure out all the feelings and all the emotions tied to that loss. Unhealthy grief, on the other hand, we usually avoid grief because we don't acknowledge that we have lost that part of ourselves. Sometimes we can reawaken old losses, like I did with my mom and my brother. I kind of tied them together because the losses were similar, because I didn't know them, and then I learned that they were different people afterwards, and I had to mourn not only the loss of the person, but the loss of the person I didn't know and wasn't fortunate enough to know. And a bereaved person cannot handle the overwhelming feelings of anger and frustration and depression and anxiety and the loss. They can't process that emotion. It's too hard for them. So they get stuck in this cycle of emotion, feeling depressed all the time, having great anxiety, losing hope, not going to work, not going to school. And these are signs that we're looking for in our students as well when our kids don't show up for school, or if they've been out a couple of days. We worry about what is going on with them. So I want to introduce a case study about Wendy. She is a 50-year-old woman who was diagnosed with ovarian cancer stage 4 10 years ago, and her husband was diagnosed a year ago with lung cancer. So it took her a very long time to find her husband. She found him in her late 40s. She was very excited. She married her best friend, and then shortly after was diagnosed. Wendy did not grow up in a happy household. Her mom worked part-time, her dad worked and supported them, but her dad was an alcoholic and he was abusive. So Wendy came into the marriage with a whole host of problems and then was diagnosed, and then shortly after her husband was diagnosed. So between her and her husband, they had a very good relationship, or so she thought, and she thought that they, were going to live together as long as possible, and that most likely she would be the one to go first because she was diagnosed long before him, and she was actually getting by, but her diagnosis never changed. So they were under the impression that she would go first, and unfortunately, he went first. So when he passed, she then realized that there were secrets about him, and she felt very betrayed. He was married several times before her. He was in financial debt. There were things that she didn't know about him. So I want to teach a skill. It's called mapping skills. And with the mapping skills, you learn how to tie an emotion to a thought, such as the thought of, I'm not lovable. You tie the emotions to that thought. And the purpose is to help you focus on your feelings and then derive a vision that you can organize the ideas, and then you can visually diagram it, and with each thought and feeling, you think about what comes up with that thought and feeling. So we start out with a blank piece of paper, and in the middle we put a circle of the loss, whether it's death, loss of a job, loss of an income, financial loss, health crisis. We put that in the middle, and we color it, whatever color we want to color it. And then from there, on the sides and all around it, we put thoughts and feelings that come up related to this loss. After that, you then draw lines, either straight or crooked, depends on what you want, and you connect the thought to each feeling that applies to this loss. So you can focus on the thoughts that you have, and then as you think of each thought, you write down the feeling associated with the thought. So somewhere close to the thought, you draw a line connecting that feeling to the thought, such as, I can't bear the feeling of despair or hopelessness. You tie that to the emotion that comes with that, which is the loneliness, the sadness, the anxiety, the heartbreak, and then you underline each feeling. And then as you underline each feeling, you think about that feeling and listen to yourself inwardly and write down any other feelings or thoughts that bubble up when you think about that feeling. Then you draw connecting lines and thoughts and feelings to the underlined and circle the feeling. And you keep doing that for each thought and feeling until nothing comes up anymore. Now, it is not a simple process. It is not one you can do, say, in one session. For me, it took several sessions to work my mom's out and my brother's. So it was a longer process for me, but I had to work through all of the things that I felt I was deprived of because of their loss. And then once you have finally come to a spot where nothing else comes up for you, when you think about that thought and feeling, now you have your map. And it can go, I've used big poster boards to actually tie my maps, and sometimes it's not easy to process through each thought and feeling as it comes up. So you may need to take a step back and then live in that thought and feeling until you can resolve everything and get it up. Some things get stuck and some things are harder to deal with. But I think most of all, for me, okay, so now we are going to work on the mapping skill, and we are going to read the case study together in our groups, and then we are going to share amongst the groups and create a mapping for Wendy. So you have 3 minutes to read the case study and 2 minutes to work together to come up with your vision of Wendy's map. So if you can pair off you two together and you two together, then we will come back together and revisit. Okay, we have 2 more minutes, and then we will work on Wendy. Okay, let's start with group one, if you could share your thoughts on Wendy, um, and what you feel are the key feelings and thoughts that came up for you when you were reading Wendy's case study. Okay, you go, Cora. Perfect. Angry. Agreed. Conflicted. Interesting. Obsessed. Why would you choose obsessed for Wendy? Oh, because she was obsessed with her husband not telling her the truth and obsessed with him or her feeling that he didn't love her. Very good point. Now, group two, if you can give a couple of the feelings that came up for you, we can then share and create our mapping. So, conflicted grief. Scared, very good. Scared is for sure. Love, betrayal. These are all very, very good feelings that would easily be in probably Wendy's thought process as you read that case study. So, now you can get a small glimpse of a mapping and how you can apply this mapping to your students as you work with your students, because each student thinks differently and ties different thoughts and feelings to the loss depending on their upbringing, their beliefs, if they believe in God or not, culturally. There's many different aspects to what creates our beliefs and our value system, and that's what will come up and through with the grieving process. So I just want to wrap up everything we've learned today about loss and grief and how important it is to focus on our feelings, our thoughts, our emotions during the process. And there is no right or wrong way. And everybody does not grieve the same way or in the same manner, in the same order. Everybody grieves differently depending on their beliefs and their values and their upbringing. So if you grow up in a family where everyone expressed their feelings, it's natural for you to express your feelings. If you grow up in a house where you didn't express your feelings and your feelings were stunted, you don't naturally express those feelings because for you that's a vulnerable place to go and you are not ready or willing or able to get to that vulnerable spot. So I want to be mindful as we work with our students here on a daily basis, 7 days a week right now during this morning process, that we are mindful of their thoughts and feelings, and no thought or feeling is wrong or right or on target or off target. I think we should just be mindful of any student who is obsessed with the suicide and is focused in on the darkness of suicide. Just to be careful that we don't have any more students who try to copycat. We don't want this spreading in our school. This is hopefully a one-time incident, and that we are fortunate enough to never have to experience again. So thank you all for coming and for sharing and taking the time for this lesson. And I just want to make sure there are no questions or any unanswered questions that are remaining while you go out and work with your students today and every day moving forward. So thank you very much and have a great, great, great day.